Hello everyone. You all asked, you begged, you commented for another crafty video. Just kidding. There was like 2 comments. But this is another crafty video, so your wish has been granted. This is knitting socks for newbies. Okay, so a quick disclaimer. I am also a newbie, very much so. So this video is kind of just as much for me as anyone else. This is kind of like all the info that I wish I could have found in one place, like the first time that I opened up a sock knitting pattern and just like felt really overwhelmed and had to Google and Google and Google to try to figure out all this stuff and or just like start and, you know, trial and error. This is everything that I wish I had found in one place for you to hopefully make things a little bit easier and more accessible for anyone that feels like they want to knit some cozy socks this winter and doesn't know where to start. This video probably won't be going over like too much specific knitting techniques. I'll probably include a few clips of specific things, but I won't be like explaining them in detail. If you want a video like that, I can totally do that. This is like a general overview of what you need to get started. So before I get into more of the details, I wanted to go over why I think socks are so awesome and possibly like the funnest things to knit, at least that I've found so far. First of all, they are super flexible. Like the patterns are really flexible in sizing. It's easy to adjust to get the perfect fit sock. I have very small feet and most like standard size socks are too big, almost always. So the idea of being able to like customize the fit of the sock is really appealing to me. Also, they are super fast to make because it's a small thing that you're making, and they're also affordable because again they're a small thing. You really only need 1 skein of sock yarn to usually be able to make a standard size pair of socks. Those sock yarns, I haven't spent more than about $7 on a skein of sock yarn so far. Obviously if you're going to like, you know, a beautiful handmade dyer and stuff, you're going to spend more, but it's very flexible that way. So that means that they also make great gifts because they're quick to make, they're cheap to make, they're easy to customize, and they're so fun to give away. So that's why I think socks are really awesome, and I think everyone who knits should definitely know how to knit socks. That just should be in your repertoire of skills that you have, that you can whip out a pair of socks whenever you need to. Okay, so diving in. The first thing that I wanted to go over was supplies. And we're going to start with yarn. So, you know, you could obviously knit up like a pair of super chunky socks that are more like slippers if you wanted to, but for like a standard pair of socks that you could actually like wear in shoes and would be comfortable to walk around on all day, you're going to need number 1, yarn weight. It's also called like super fine fingering yarn, sometimes even light fingering, sock yarn. You can find it under all those names on different websites. I can't tell you how many times I have had to like look up the yarn weight chart to figure out how everything corresponds, but that's it. Sock fingering, super fine, weight number 1. That's what you're gonna want for a standard pair of socks. So that kind of makes it easy. You kind of have a limitation there on like the thickness of your yarn. Because of that, there also is kind of like 1 standard size of needles that works really well, which also makes this a very affordable branch of knitting, I would say, but I'll go over more of that later. As far as materials go, the ideal kind of sock yarn is about 75% wool, 25% nylon. With wool, you get a lot of moisture wicking, comfort, and breathability, and all insulation, all of that good stuff that comes with wool. And then the nylon adds a little bit more strength to the yarn, because I can tell you that having worked with a good amount of wool yarn at this point, knitting up several pairs of socks, I have had a couple times where the yarn just pulls apart and I have to tie it up and you know, work it back in. So the nylon definitely helps with that part of it, keeping it a little bit more durable. There are other blends that you can totally use. Cotton, you know, a lot of people buy cotton socks on the regular from like a big box store, so cotton's fine. There's a few other things, I think it's called viscose or something similar, that's like a bamboo byproduct, that is sometimes in cotton blends. That's another good option if you want to be really eco-friendly. My absolute favorite yarn that I have loved knitting up socks on is called Perfect Pair. Let me show you a few of the skeins that I have. So I think this is not a wool blend yarn, but it is, I think, the absolute easiest for if you're like knitting up a pair of socks for the very first time. I highly recommend just picking up a pair or a skein of Perfect Pair. One skein will absolutely make a pair of socks with a good amount left over. It comes in a million colors and it is self-striping, which means that, let me pull out a pair that I've already finished, which means that the stripes just magically appear. It's also really easy to find the same part, like area of color that you started your first one with and make a, oops, I am dropping my yarn. Make a second one that has the exact same stripes. So you just get like a really kind of polished, professional looking sock with a yarn that's also really easy to knit with. I love it. It also is very, let me see, very super stretchy, like so stretchy. I can't even express to you how stretchy it is, which also makes it really easy for knitting. Yeah, it's really great. It's pretty regularly sold out at Michael's. I will link it below, even if it is sold out. I think they restock pretty frequently. And I got all of these for only $3 each. So you're knitting up an entire pair of custom-made socks for $3 on sale. So that's pretty cool too. Perfect Pair, I highly recommend for people starting out. You're just gonna be happy with what you end up with, even if it's very imperfect, which my first pair was. I still felt like they were super cute and I like to wear them. So that's what I recommend. Oh, let me also mention, these are an acrylic bamboo blend. So like, you know, not the most ideal like blend for if you needed socks that did something specific, like warmth or keep your feet dry. These are not going to be those. This is just like a standard pair of socks for light use, I would say. But that's probably the thing that makes it so cheap and so great for when you're just trying to learn. Oh, also, literally everything that I mentioned, I will link below as much as I possibly can. I do make like Amazon affiliate money off the Amazon link, so if you feel like supporting me that way, awesome, click the link. I think it tracks whatever you buy for the next 24 hours. And it doesn't have to be what I linked, which is very cool. It doesn't cost you anything. It just costs Amazon a little bit and I make a little bit. So let's take it to the big man and make me some money off Amazon. And then the last thing to note and to pay attention to is that for a pair of socks, you're going to need at least 350 yards of yarn. Most like 100-gram sock yarn skeins are going to be at least 350 to 450. I think that these Perfect Pair are 454 yards. Most of the ones that I have are in the 400s yard length. But pay attention to that. If you get ones that are like 50 grams, you're probably going to need like 2 of them. So that is the other thing to note as far as when you're looking for yarn to start knitting socks. Okay, next thing we are going to jump into is needles. There's a few different kinds of techniques that you can use when building your socks with different kinds of needles, and I think it can get pretty confusing if you're not familiar with all of the terminology. So I'm just going to go over all of it, show you it all here, and then you get to choose what you like best to do. I'll give you pros and cons also. So first off, we have circulars. You know your standard circular needles. Most people use those for building most items of clothing, I would say. These are 9-inch circulars with a short needle. They're from Chiaogu on Amazon, and they're really the only brand that I found that does exactly this. They are really nice to hold. The wire is super, super flexible, so they're great for, you know, tiny things. I thought that they might make my hands tired, but they haven't so far. They've been great, and the points are a little on the pointier side. I actually pretty badly stabbed myself with one of them a few weeks ago. It was falling, I tried to catch it, and it went right into my fingers, or into my hand. So they are sharp if you're not careful. But that means that they're great for little tiny sock yarns. So I highly recommend these. I've loved them. I've made lots and lots of pairs of socks on them, and they've been great so far. You're also going to need, at least for the toe and the heel of your socks, you're going to need double pointed needles. These are really intimidating to me because I hadn't ever really used double pointed needles before socks. I'd kind of gotten away with just using circulars or like straight needles. But these are also invaluable. These are the same ones from Chiaogu. They're pretty affordable. I will link everything below. And the nice thing is that since the points are like exactly the same, let me see if I can focus. Since the points are exactly the same, you're going to get a really nice consistent stitch if you use this same brand. And I really like the steel. It's good for like kind of the grippy wool yarns that you're often using. They slide on these needles really nicely. So I highly recommend these. And you're going to need both. You cannot get away with making a pair of socks with just circulars, unfortunately. I have tried. It does not work. you have to have double pointed needles. I will go over kind of how they're used later, maybe. But just know that they're important. The other thing that you will see on occasion in patterns is the magic loop. Don't be confused. There are lots of things that I have found that have the word magic in them. The magic loop, when it pertains to needles that you're using to knit your socks, is when you're using a long circular needle and you're just pulling it through as if it was 2 needles side by side, which I know sounds really confusing. I'm not even gonna go over it too much because honestly, I think that it's kind of an advanced technique. Lots of people who do it love it because you can do 2 socks at the same time. I think that it's not great for beginners because if you make a mistake, that means you make it twice and you have to go back twice, and I think it's easier to do 1 sock at a time, make sure you like how it looks, that everything's right, you know, have a chance to go back and fix things a little bit easier. Magic loop, I would say, is very useful for when you are really fast, but not for newbies, so we are not going over it here. But just know it involves longer circulars and mostly multiple sock knitting at the same time, which just sounds exhausting when I even say it out loud. Oh, also to note, pretty much every pattern I have found so far, at least if you're using the standard, you know, yarn weight of 1 sock yarn, the size of needle that's going to work for you is 2.75. You could maybe get away with 3, but honestly, for everything that I've done, 2.75 has been perfect. So I really have only double pointed needles and 2 circulars in 2.75. It's been great. You could probably be just fine with only this size and have it work, you know, across the board for any sock that you're doing. That's what I would use. Okay, so we've gone through supplies. That's kind of, I think, the most confusing supplies, just figuring out what to even buy. So theoretically, you've now bought your supplies and you are ready to start a pattern. So we're gonna go over the pattern. There are 2 major techniques for sock knitting. Either you're starting at the cuff, starting at the top and working your way down to the toe, or you're starting at the toe and working your way up to the cuff. A lot of times I think it depends on like what you're knitting, what kind of pattern you're knitting. For instance, this sock was a cable knit, and so because the way that the cables, you know, if you wanted like that kind of upside down V, you have to start at the toe and work your way up. For these that I'm knitting right now, it's a very complicated lace, and you are starting at the cuff and working your way down. So, you know, I'm sure there's reasons for why the pattern writers did it the way they did it, but just know that those are the 2 major techniques. And I would say if you're starting out, you should start with something that starts at the cuff, because then you get to work the cuff. Usually it's like a simple rib, or you're just jumping right into the pattern. It's just, you start on your circular needles. It's simple to just go, and you go, you know, from the cuff all the way down the leg, and then the first time it kind of starts to get complicated is the heel. So you've had like all this time to get comfortable with your yarn, with your needles, with, you know, how you're doing it on this little tiny, because most of the time this is like the smallest yarn and the smallest needles you're ever going to use. So you have lots of time to get comfortable with it before you get to kind of the more complicated part. So I would recommend starting with something that starts at the cuff for your first pair. But I actually do like how like a toe up pattern looks at the end. This one was toe up, and it's really awesome because you have these invisible starting stitches on the toe that leave no knots, no lumps. It's just like a very smooth, comfortable sock to wear. And it just feels good. You have to be a little more careful with a cuff down sock when you get to the end and you're sewing the last, 16 stitches together on the toe. You have to kind of be careful you're not making anything that's going to be real lumpy that could like hurt your toes later as you're wearing it, because that is a spot, like if you have any lumps in your socks, I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but if you have any lumps in your socks from the seam, it can really start to rub on those spots. So I do like toe up for that reason. If you're feeling really brave, you could start with that, but I recommend cuff first for your very first pair at least. And I will say, as a disclaimer, I do love toe up, but I've literally had to restart it like 4 times. Every single time I have done a toe up sock, I have never successfully started it and just gone and like not had to redo it. There's always something wrong with my tension, or I slipped a stitch somewhere or something. It's not easy, but I do like it. So I endure it. But yeah, every single one I've had to do like multiple redos to get it right. Okay, at this point, I want to go over sock anatomy because each pattern in socks is pretty universal that you're going to like do it section by section according to kind of the anatomy of a sock. And because socks are kind of more standardized, there's kind of really only one way to do it, you know, depending on which direction you're going. So I'm just going to go over sock anatomy so that at least you know all of the terms, you have them in your head when you're looking at your pattern. Okay, so here's a nice sock to start with. I feel like you can see the stitches pretty clearly. So here's the cuff. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. Here's the cuff. Not all socks have a cuff. Sometimes they jump right into the pattern, but regardless, this is where you start for a top-down sock, and it's usually still called the cuff. Once you hit past, you know, the initial cuff part, you're onto the leg. This is called the leg. No matter how long or short it is, it's called the leg. And then you hit the heel. The heel is usually stitched straight from the leg down. And then the next part where it gets kind of complicated is the gusset. There's lots of different ways that these are all connected together. Sometimes they're all like, this is all stitched like this, and then so, like, you know, stitch back into this, and then you continue. Or sometimes if you're working your way up like this one was, then you're like expanding out and then contracting back, and it's all kind of in one piece. I know that's confusing, but just know that always you're gonna, if you're starting from the top, it's cuff, leg, heel, and then the next part is the gusset. The gusset is where it's decreasing, or if you're going toe up, increasing into the heel. And usually it's gonna be, this is where like if you have a pattern on the front, it's gonna be, you know, no more pattern for the bottom of the foot because you want something smooth to step on. So usually the leg will be the pattern all the way around, and then you hit the heel and the gusset, and you're now only doing half the pattern if there is a pattern, if it's not just like a stockinette stitch or something. But yeah, so that's kind of where things switch to like 1 needle, 2 needle, different sections going on. So that's the gusset where you're either increasing or decreasing depending on which direction you're going. This top part that's gonna have the pattern continued usually on top of the foot is called the instep, and then this usually is just called the foot. Once you get past the end of the gusset part where you're increasing or decreasing, then the rest is called the foot, and you're usually just doing the foot straight with a smooth on the bottom and a pattern on the top until you hit the toe, which is where you are decreasing into, you know, the end. So I hope that made sense. If you're going to be reading the pattern, it's going to go cuff, leg, heel, gusset, foot, toe, or toe, foot, gusset, heel, leg, cuff. It's pretty universal as far as I've seen. I know that was kind of a rambling explanation, but hopefully with me pointing at it, you can figure it out. That's really it. It's pretty basic once you've been through a few patterns, I think. And speaking of which direction you're starting, there usually a lot of patterns I think have the cast-ons listed that they recommend. If they don't, however, I just want to let you know that what's worked for me so far pretty much across the board has been either an old Norwegian cast-on for the cuff, or the Judy's Magic cast-on for the toe. I think I will pop in a little demonstration video right here just so you can see what that looks like. Take it away, future Emma. Okay, this is the old Norwegian cast-on. It's a long tail cast-on, so you have a long tail. Obviously, about 3 times the length of your project usually. You're going to start with a slip knot, and you do your loop like this. You just grab this one off your thumb, wrap over this one off of your first finger, put it back through the loop on your thumb, slip it off your thumb, and pull tight. So I'll do it a few more times. I'm not going to go into depth on this. I just want you to be able to see it so that when you're searching for it, you can make sure that you're finding the right one. That's it. You just do it. Usually I think the long tail is your thumb one, so you should end up with not very much left over if you kind of measure it right. But that's it. It makes a very nice, solid, stretchy kind of border for your cuff. Looks like that when it's done. Then the other one I want to show you is the Judy's Magic Loop. So you have 2 double-pointed needles. You're going to put a slip knot on this one. Some of the videos I watched say you don't even need a slip knot. I have never been successful not using a slip knot, just FYI. I would still use one. And then you're going to do the same loop like this. And then all you do is you wrap over top, go down, wrap in between the two. So you put your needles over the top of both of them, slip it in between like this, and then you bring your needles down, slip it in between again. So this one you wrap around, and then this one you just slip through. I don't know if that is easy to see or not, but that is really it. And you make as many as you need to make. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll just stop right here. And then all you need to do, so you can see how they're kind of, the threads are kind of loose on the back side. You're just going to twist it around like this. Get your long tail end out of the way, and then you just start knitting. So you have it kind of like looped off the back, and then you grab another double pointed needle. You hold these like this, and then you start your knitting. You just stick it right in between. Yarn over, pull it back through. This is the hardest part of starting with a toe down. I think this is pretty difficult, but once you figure out kind of how to do it, it does get easier. And like I said before, I've never done this successfully on the first try. I've almost always had slip stitches or some kind of weird tension thing. I'm sure with time it'll get easier, but I have found it to be not the easiest, but also looks great once you get it right. Let's see, okay, this one's even giving me a hard time. It is hard to keep these stitches snug, which is what you want in the toe of your sock, and still be able to actually knit them. But this is essentially all it is. It's just, you just gotta kind of work with it. And there you go. You just literally keep going around the needles, and eventually you end up with these nice little, let's see if you can focus on that. You end up with these nice little knit stitches that are just invisible in the middle of your needle. So we just did this side. All we would do is take our yarn that we just used and go around the other side. Push that one down. I have to really hold on to it with my fingers, so I can't necessarily just have it loose to show you particularly easy, but just keep on going around. And then it kind of loosens up as you go, as you add stitches to it. And usually when you're doing a toe, you'll start increasing pretty quickly. After this first row, you would start increasing on the ends of each row. So then it'll get even easier because you'll be adding more stitches also. But yeah, this is Judy's Magic Cast On, the way that I like to do it at least. There you go. It's a good example of what it should look like if you do it right, and what makes it so awesome is these nice little invisible knit stitches that end up right at the toe of your sock. And by the way, this is the Chroma fingering weight yarn from Knit Picks. I think this one, let me zoom out. This one is so pretty. This kind of nice green, fade to brown, fade to black, back to green. This Chroma line from Knit Picks is, I think, about $7 or $8 a skein, and it is really nice to work with. I love it. Last thing to note as you are looking at patterns and getting started is that a lot of patterns, especially I think older patterns, list instructions using double pointed needles. So they'll say like needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, needle 4, whatever, instead of talking about circular needles. But just know that almost all the time you can use a circular needle instead of a double pointed needle until you probably get to, like, you know, the heel or the toe where things get pretty tight. You can almost always use a circular needle and it's going to be easier. The key that I have found with that, I really struggled with that on my first pair of socks. Like, I was so confused. I was triple checking things all the time. I was like, can I use circular needles? You can. The key is just to use stitch markers like religiously. I have a habit developed now of always using a blue stitch marker to mark needle 1, and then like a yellow stitch marker to mark the beginning of needle 2, and that's how I keep track of it. And I have a habit and I automatically kind of know it in my head at this point. But yeah, I couldn't do it without stitch markers, and they're super important when you're kind of keep track of like which needle's which. There's a lot of times when you're increasing or decreasing around like the gusset and the heel where it really matters where your stitch markers are for the needles. So just know that pretty much anything you can convert to circulars pretty easily as long as you're just using stitch markers instead of separate needles. Okay, the next thing I want to go over is sizing. Not all patterns are really clear on sizing. That was something I spent a lot of time Googling the first few times I was working with some of my now favorite patterns when I was really confused. For instance, out of this book, I love this book so much. I highly recommend it. I will link it below. My mom got it for me for my birthday. It truly is like fabulous and beautiful and has the most amazing photography. Like, oh, it's great. But they don't really talk about sizing in here. So after doing some research, what I've discovered is that there's kind of like 2 standard sizes for socks if it's not like listed by the inch, which sometimes it is and will be necessary if you're doing men's sizes, by the way. This is like pretty much women's sizes only, unfortunately. It's just, I don't know. I guess if you were knitting a guy's sock that was smaller, then it would be fine. But I'll explain. So basically the standard kind of sizes are either 64 stitches around or 72 stitches around. Most patterns will fit within those 2. My ideal sock as a woman's size 6 is like 60 stitches around, while my husband, who's a size 11 men's, is like 80 stitches around. So we're both kind of just outside of those ranges. So, you know, you're gonna have to use your best judgment on that. If you're ever not sure, by the way, just use a stretchier yarn. Most sock patterns by nature have a lot of stretchiness and give, because that's like the point. It's a sock. It needs to be stretchy. So don't overthink it too much. But I will say standard sizes are 64 stitches or 72 stitches. 64 stitches is like a small to medium. 72 is like a medium large. Maybe like a 6 to 8 women's for 64 stitches, 9 to 11 women's for 72, which is why I say like it could also be like a men's smaller size sock. But that's kind of what you're going to find the most frequently, I think. So as long as you kind of have that in your head, it's easy to kind of decide which size you need to work with. It's you know, it's pretty self-explanatory at that point. If you're lucky and you find a pattern that uses inches to go around, then it's real easy to like measure the person's foot or guesstimate, you know, what size based on that. But they just don't all have that. And, you know, especially like big collections like this book is entirely 64 or 72 stitches for all the patterns. So that's just something to note. Sizing is something that's really weird with socks. I don't know why they don't all do inches, but they don't. So there you go. The thing that is super customizable about the size is the length. The length of the leg, the length of the foot, super easy to just add more rows generally. Unless it's like a super complicated specific pattern, it'll be easy to adjust, and almost all patterns will leave room for that also in their instructions. So length is easier than width, I would say, as far as adjusting goes, but they're all pretty forgiving at the end of the day anyway because of the nature of socks and sock yarns and sock patterns. Okay, that's kind of all I've got for you. As far as sock patterns go, like I already mentioned this book, I love it so much. It's beautiful. It's probably a mix of like beginning, intermediate, and advanced. I wouldn't say all of them are advanced, but you know, there are some pretty intense patterns in there, mixed in with some easier ones. So I would say don't start with a book like this, but it is a really great resource to have. Easier patterns are honestly, the patterns on the inside of the Perfect Pair socks I have made, there's 2 different patterns, and they're both great. And that was the very first pair of socks I knitted up, was just the basic stockinette socks from this, the insert of this yarn, and it went great, and it's easy to read. It's obviously tiny print, so you'll like need a magnifying glass, but it's pretty clear. So this is a really good place to start, to be honest. Otherwise, obviously, Ravelry is a really great resource. I don't have a particular maker on Ravelry that I can recommend. Just kind of across the board, you know, it's easy to use all the search terms in Ravelry and find just exactly what you need. So I would look there. It's always worth paying for it, by the way, also. I found that patterns you pay for generally are high quality, and if you're starting out and the instructions are already confusing, make sure that you get something with really good, clear instructions. It'll help you a lot. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to go over a few of the helpful tools that I have kind of found to be invaluable with knitting socks. I just keep them in my little bag of notions all the time. So I just wanted to go over those, link them if they might be helpful to you. Let's see. First off is needle stoppers. I have a whole pack of them here that are different sizes, but obviously the ones that you will need will be like the small size for a 2.75 millimeter needle. When you're working with a tiny stretchy thing like a sock, it is so easy for your needle to just have stitches slipping off of it if you're not paying attention. one thing that's so great about sock knitting is that it's so mobile. You can really take it with you because it's just such a small thing. You can just stuff it in a little pouch and go and do it on the train, do it on a car ride, do it while you're waiting at the doctor's office, whatever. But taking it out of a bag means more opportunities for things to get messed up. So definitely needle stoppers I have found to be invaluable. I actually didn't even buy any ever until I started sock knitting, and then I like really needed them. So I highly recommend those. I also highly recommend stitch markers in different colors. I have a whole pack of stitch markers in different sizes. The ones that I love for sock knitting are these little guys right here. They look like little safety pins, and I will see if I can find them on Amazon. I didn't get them from Amazon. I got them from a different pack of knitting needles, but I love them for sock knitting. They have good colors, they're durable, and they're just the right size. They don't really get in the way of anything. So stitch markers in different colors are going to be really important as you're marking off like different needles. The other thing that I think is a must-have is a measuring tape. I have this little one right here. I think I got it from Hobby Lobby, but I'll see if I can find a similar one online. It's a bee. It's very cute, but it is just the perfect little thing that I can keep with me that's easy to carry around. Because sock knitting goes so quickly, you very frequently need to like check your measurements, and because the rows that you're doing are so tiny, generally most patterns are not going to go by row unless it's a specific lacy pattern like this one where you're following a chart. Otherwise, it's pretty much always going to be inches, like a majority of knitting patterns probably, but especially with socks. So you need to have a measuring tape that you can just grab and check to make sure that everything is right as you go. So I highly recommend keeping one of these nearby. The other thing that you are absolutely going to need is a crochet hook. A crochet hook, I think this one is a size F. I think this is a 2.75 or maybe a 3 millimeter. But something that's about the same size as your knitting needles is going to be really important. With how small these stitches are and how small the needles are, it is impossible. I'm telling you right now, it is like impossible to fix dropped stitches without a crochet hook. This is like, I have to use this a lot. So definitely have one of these nearby. You will regret not having it when you're sitting there knitting happily and then you realize you lost a whole row of stitches and you can't get it back because you can't knit it very easily. Crochet hook's just going to be a lifesaver. And then a couple other kinds of needles that I keep handy. Cable stitch needle. You need one that's, you know, the right size. This one's been okay. I got it, I think, from Michael's. I think I would probably not recommend this type of cable needle for socks just because they're so small. This is a lot of needle to like work with. I think I'd probably get the U-shaped ones next time I buy them. But you do need a cable needle for a lot of patterns, especially patterns that are thicker and more wintry, like this one. I use this constantly, and it is a nice, thick, durable sock, which I love. So you're gonna need a cable needle for a lot of patterns. And then if you are doing some pattern where you end at the toe and you have to put, you know, stitches together, you're going to need a good little like needle to be able to do that with. You really can't finish the sock without it. Again, the stitches are just too small. Like you can't use your fingers. Using a knitting needle is just, it's really hard to get like the right angle, torque on those stitches to be able to do it. So a needle is absolutely the way to go for that. And I think that's it. I think that's all my tips. If you have any questions, drop them. I will absolutely answer them if I see them below this video in the comments. And I hope this convinced you. If you were a little bit intimidated, I hope this convinced you to try knitting socks because they are so fun. Let's all knit socks together. Maybe someday I'll be able to do live streams again. We'll see. My internet's not fast enough right now. But I miss you. I miss doing that. So maybe I'll reactivate my Discord, get it going again. We can all share pictures of socks that we're knitting. I think that'd be really fun. Let me know what you think. Okay, so don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already, and comment and all of the things. Love you guys. Follow me on Instagram if you're not already. I post a lot of updates there, especially now, you know, regarding like our van build. So I know that's not super fun for everybody, but thanks for sticking with me through it because I'm excited about it, and I will catch you in the next video. The exact same thing but on the top. So you might need to double check those cords to be honest.